October 18, 1967. A tracking station on the edge of the Black Sea, in Crimea, where a room full of engineers sat listening to a machine fall into another planet. It was a metal sphere a little over a meter across, wrapped in insulation, packed with instruments, and it was dropping through the clouds of Venus for the first time in human history. For a few minutes, the numbers coming back were almost friendly. The pressure read close to what you would feel at the surface of the Earth. The temperature was mild, and then, the deeper it fell, the more the numbers began to climb, and they did not stop climbing. The pressure doubled, and doubled again. The heat rose past anything a summer day has ever produced. Somewhere still high above the surface, long before it reached the ground it was built to touch, the sphere stopped transmitting. It had been crushed like a can underfoot. In the dark, inside the atmosphere of the planet everyone had spent 100 years calling Earth's twin sister. That was the fourth machine, and here is the part I still cannot quite get my head around. Knowing exactly what had happened to it. Knowing that Venus had folded a titanium ball flat before it could even land. They built another one, and another, and sent them down into the same place, over and over, for the next 18 years. What I want to talk about today is a campaign so stubborn it still does not quite seem real to me. Between 1966 and 1985, the Soviet Union kept sending landing craft down into the atmosphere of Venus and kept losing them. 13 of those machines got far enough to send something home before they died, and all 13 are still down there now. One of them, before it went, lasted just long enough to hand us something no machine has managed to send home in the 40 years since. Almost nobody tells this story properly, and I think that is because it does not fit the shape we like our space stories to have. There is no triumphant survival at the end. Every hero in this story is destroyed by the thing it was sent to understand. What you get instead is stranger and, to me, better. A picture of the ground of another world, taken in the few dozen minutes a machine could stay alive to take it, that overturned an assumption people had held for a century. The reason those machines were worth building, and worth losing, is not the one you would expect, and it changes what the whole campaign was actually for. Stick with this one, because it is not the story you think it is. To understand why any of this mattered, you have to understand what people thought Venus was before we went there. And for most of human history, we thought it was hope. Venus is the brightest thing in the sky after the sun and the moon. It is almost exactly the size of the Earth, the same rock, the same weight, one orbit closer to the sun, and it is wrapped head to foot in a smooth, featureless deck of white cloud that never breaks. For centuries, nobody could see a single feature on it. And when you cannot see the surface of a world that is otherwise the mirror image of your own, you fill the gap with the thing you want to be there. What people wanted was somewhere like home. In 1918, the Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius, a Nobel Prize winner and one of the most respected scientists alive, sat down and worked out what had to be under those clouds. A planet that size, that close to the sun, that wet with cloud, could only be one thing. He described a Venus where everything is dripping wet, covered in swamps like the great coal forests of the Earth's deep past, thick with abundant vegetation. A younger, warmer twin of our own world, running a few 100 million years behind us. That was not a fringe idea. That was the settled scientific picture, and it held, in one form or another, into the 1960s. Venus was the planet next door, where life almost certainly waited, under the clouds, in the warm and the wet. Science fiction ran with it for 50 years. Dinosaur jungles, warm oceans, rain. A whole imagined Venus grew up in books and films, green and steaming and alive, and it grew because the science underneath it seemed sound. The confidence was real, and it was old, and it was shared by serious people who had every reason to trust it. When the first machines went to Venus, they were not being sent to a place anyone feared. They were being sent to meet a sister world, and the twin killed them. The clouds that hid the surface were not water. They were droplets of concentrated sulfuric acid. The air underneath was 90 times heavier than the air you are breathing. A crushing ocean of carbon dioxide so dense it behaves less like a gas and more like a fluid. And the temperature at the bottom of it, held in by that thick blanket of gas, sits at around 465 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, tin, and zinc, hotter than the inside of a self-cleaning oven, everywhere, day and night, with no seasons and no relief. It is the most hostile solid surface anywhere near the Earth, and we walked toward it expecting a garden. So the machines died, and they died in a long line. Venera 3 reached Venus in 1966 and became the first object humans ever put onto the surface of another planet, and it arrived already dead. Its instruments failed on the way in, and it told us nothing at all. Venera 4 fell in 1967 and was crushed in the sky, still miles up, sending back numbers nobody wanted to believe. Venera 5 and Venera 6 went down in 1969, built stronger, and the planet crushed them too, both of them, before either one reached the ground. 4 machines thrown into Venus, and 4 machines lost, and not one of them had touched the surface and survived to say a single word from it. Read the reports from those years, and you can feel the picture darkening. The dream of the warm twin was gone. In its place was a number, 465 degrees, and a pressure that no spacecraft anyone knew how to build could stand for long. The surface of Venus was quietly written off as a place where machines could not work, not because it was difficult or expensive. As far as anyone could tell, it simply could not be done. And this is the exact point where almost any space program would have stopped. The obvious lesson of 4 dead machines is that the surface is unreachable, so you study Venus from a safe distance, from orbit, and you leave the ground alone. That was the rational call. That was what the evidence said. The engineers at the Lavochkin Design Bureau, in the woods outside Moscow, made a different call, and it came from turning the problem completely inside out. Lavochkin was run in those years by a chief designer named Georgy Babkin, a former radio engineer who had taken over the bureau in 1965 and made it the place where the Soviet Union built the machines it sent to other worlds. And under him, his engineers stopped asking the question everyone else was asking. The rest of the world wanted to know how you build a machine that can survive on the surface of Venus. And the honest answer to that question, then and now, is that you cannot. Nothing you can carry across the solar system can sit in a 465-degree furnace under 90 atmospheres indefinitely. The electronics cook, the seals fail, and the heat works its way in no matter what you do. And once it is inside, the machine is finished. Framed that way, the problem has no solution, and the 4 dead probes had already proved it. So they stopped asking that question and asked a different one. Not how do you survive Venus? How long do you actually need to survive it? And the answer was not forever. It was under an hour. That reframing is the quiet turning point of this whole story, and it is the kind of idea that looks obvious only in hindsight. The goal became narrow and strange. Build something that could die on Venus on a schedule and get its entire job done in the minutes before the heat won. A machine that races its own death down to the surface, works as fast as it possibly can, and sends everything home before the furnace closes over it. Once that was the goal, the design changed completely, and it stopped looking like a spacecraft and started looking like a deep-sea submersible. A thick titanium pressure sphere, the shape that resists crushing best, sealed tight around the instruments. They chilled the whole thing down to well below freezing before it ever hit the atmosphere, so it began its fall with a reserve of cold to spend. They packed the inside with blocks of a special salt chosen for one strange property. As it melts, it swallows an enormous amount of heat without getting any hotter, pulling the warmth out of the electronics and buying a few more precious minutes. Then they reworked the descent itself so the machine would drop fast, punch down through the atmosphere quickly, and spend as little time as possible, being slowly baked on the way to the ground. They were not trying to build a survivor. They were building a sacrifice, engineered down to the minute, and everyone who worked on it knew that every machine they launched was being sent to its death on purpose. It stays with me, this willingness to pour years of work into an object whose entire success would last less time than a lunch break. And then, when it died on schedule, to build another one and do it again. The first sign that it might work came in December of 1970. Venera 7 fell to the surface. Its parachute tore near the end, and it hit the ground hard and toppled onto its side, and in the control room it looked like one more failure, one more silent machine. Then, weeks later, going back through the recordings, they found it. Buried under the noise, faint because the fallen antenna was pointing the wrong way, was a weak signal that had kept transmitting for around 20 minutes after the machine hit the ground. Venera 7 had become the first object from Earth to land on another planet and send data back from its surface. It had reached the ground and held on for those 20 minutes before Venus finished it, and those 20 minutes changed everything. If a machine could live for 20 minutes down there, the surface was not off limits after all. It was a place you could visit, briefly, if you were willing to keep spending machines to do it. So they kept spending them. Venera 8 lasted nearly an hour and measured the light at the surface, and found, against expectation, that enough sunlight filtered down through all that cloud to see by, which meant the next thing was suddenly worth attempting. If you could see down there, you could take a picture. Georgy Babakin did not live to find out whether it would work. He died of a heart attack in 1971, with Venera 7 barely cold on the surface, and not a single photograph yet taken. The bureau he had built carried on without him, toward the thing he had set it up to do. Which brings us to the 22nd of October, 1975, and Venera 9, and the most improbable photograph I know of. Venera 9 carried 2 cameras behind thick quartz windows, each protected by a heavy cap that was supposed to pop off after landing so the camera could look out. The lander was designed to work for about 30 minutes before Venus did to it what Venus had done to all the others. Nobody could be certain the cameras would survive the descent, or that the caps would release, or that a picture would build up cleanly and cross 100 million kilometers of space before the machine died underneath it. Every stage of it was a thing that had never been done, stacked on top of another thing that had never been done. The machine landed. It held. One of the 2 lens caps released, and the camera behind it began to scan, slowly, line by line, the way an old fax machine builds an image from the top down, and the picture came. It worked. Line by line, for the first time in history, the surface of another planet assembled itself on screens back on Earth, and it was not a swamp, or a jungle, or an ocean, or the warm green twin that 100 years of hope had painted under those clouds. It was a plain of flat, broken, sharp-edged rock, running off to a close horizon under a dim orange sky, lit by a heavy, sourceless light. It looked like the floor of a furnace, because that is what it was. Venera 9 lived for 53 minutes on the surface of Venus, and in that time it sent home the first photograph ever taken standing on the ground of another world. And this is the thing that genuinely moves me about it. That machine was already dying as it took the picture. The heat was already coming in. It had under an hour, and its builders knew it had under an hour, and in that under an hour it closed a question that had been open since before anyone in that control room was born. A century of imagining Venus ended by 53 minutes of a machine that was being cooked to death as it looked around. Under an hour, against 100 years. That is the trade the whole campaign was built on, and it is why the shortness of these missions has stopped reading to me as the tragedy of them. 53 minutes was the achievement, and getting it once did not mean they could get it again. The next 2 landers, Venera 11 and Venera 12, reached the surface in 1978 and worked beautifully, one for 95 minutes and one for 110. They measured the air, they caught the first clear evidence of lightning on another planet. And they saw nothing, because on both machines, on all 4 cameras, the lens caps failed to release. 2 spacecraft crossed the entire solar system, survived the fall through the acid and the heat, sat working on the surface of Venus for well over an hour each, and came home blind, staring at the inside of their own covers. It took 4 crippled attempts before the engineers finally redesigned the cap so it would come off cleanly every time. When it worked, it gave us the pictures we still use. In March of 1982, Venera 13 came down onto a rolling plane, built like all of them, to last about half an hour, and it held on for 127 minutes before it died. It photographed the ground in full color, red-brown rock under a burnt orange sky, then reached out with a small drill, pulled a sample of Venusian soil inside itself, and read it as a volcanic basalt, the rock of a world shaped by fire. Those panoramas are the only color images of the Venusian surface anyone has ever taken. None of these machines came back. None of them was ever meant to. But what they learned did not die with them. It outlived the machines, and then it outlived the country that built them. The weight of that air, the chemistry of that soil, the acid in those clouds, the heat at the ground, nearly all of it was bought by landers that survived less than a single episode of television. When the American Magellan probe mapped the whole planet by radar in the early 1990s, the only ground truth it had to check its maps against came from landers that had died years earlier, for a state that was gone by the time the map was finished. The people who made them had stopped. The data had not. For all of it, the harvest was painfully thin. Add up every minute that every lander survived down there, across 2 decades and 10 machines that reached the ground, and it comes to only a few hours of direct data from an entire planet, gathered at a handful of scattered spots. And there is a worse limit than how little they sent back. The dream those machines were built to test was never really about rock and temperature. It was the oldest question we had about the place, whether Venus had ever, in some deep past before its heat ran away, been the wet and living twin we imagined, whether it once had oceans? That is the exact question the landers could not answer. They told us in hard detail what Venus is now. Whether it was ever anything gentler, we still do not know, because the machines that might have found out never lived more than a couple of hours, long enough to scrape the surface, and no more. Every one of those landers is still down there, cooked into the rock where it fell, and the world most like our own remains the least explored solid ground anywhere near the Earth. There is a harder question hiding under all of this. Is a hard, ugly fact worth more than a beautiful, comfortable guess, when the fact will cost you everything you send to get it? You can decide that one for yourself. I only know where I land. They could have kept the dream. A warm twin under the clouds, alive today, with something waiting in the wet, is a lovely thing to believe, and believing it cost nothing at all. They spent 13 machines to trade that comfort for a furnace, and I find I cannot bring myself to call it a waste. The machines did not conquer Venus. Nothing conquers Venus. They did something smaller, and to me something braver. They lasted long enough. They got down into the worst place we have ever sent a spacecraft, did their work in the minutes before it killed them, and sent the truth home while they still could. If you could stand on Venus, which you cannot, which nothing living could, you would see roughly what Venera 13 saw. Flat slabs of orange rock reaching out to a horizon that seems too close. A sky the color of a rusted ember, with no sun in it, just a heavy, even glow soaking down through 50 kilometers of cloud. Total silence, in air thick enough to swim through, at a heat that would end you in seconds. And somewhere out on that plain, if you knew where to look, a dead machine lying on its side. Its cameras long since blinded, the last thing from Earth ever to stand there, because that is where this ends. 10 Soviet machines reached the surface of Venus. 9 of them sent word back from the ground. The last of them, the 2 Vega landers, fell silent in 1985. In the 40 years since, no nation on Earth has put a working machine on that surface, and the only color photographs of the ground of Venus that exist anywhere were taken by landers built to be destroyed, in the handful of minutes before they were. Nobody has taken another since. Not because we forgot how. It is just that hard, and no one, so far, has been willing to spend machines the way that campaign was willing to spend them. There is a whole shelf of stories, shaped like this one. Missions that got written off as doomed, or wasteful, or plain impossible, and that look completely different once you sit with what actually happened to them. If that is the kind of thing you want more of, this channel is mostly made of it. Come back and dig through a few of them with me.